All right, we're getting to the end here about creating our trebuchet in OnShape, and we're getting to the part that is sort of the final steps, which is taking all the parts you've designed and combining them and assembling them digitally. So to do this, you're going to want to create a tab that's an assembly. We did this when we imported the bearing, but we should also have an assembly that is empty that we call trebuchet. We're going to put all of our parts into this trebuchet assembly. If you don't have one of these, you can click plus and create an assembly and then just title it trebuchet. When you're in an assembly, what you can do is you can insert parts. So the first thing I might do is I might click insert, and I can see all the other parts in this document. I've got my basket parts, I've got my base parts, my arm parts, and I've got that ball bearing that I imported. If I click this little tab here, I'll see all the other assemblies. I've got the bearing assembly where I put all the pieces together. So I might need to use that later. So the first thing I might do is I might import the base. Let me click base. And you'll see it imports all the parts from my base Part Studio. And the way I built them, they are kind of in the right spot. So if they're actually already in the right spot relative to each other, you can start, let's click this green check mark, by highlighting those multiple parts and selecting the grouping command. I'm going to group those parts. Click the green check mark. Now you can see under mate features, I've created group 1, and group 1 includes those 3 parts. So they won't move relative to each other because they are grouped. I can move them, but they won't move relative to each other. But what about if things weren't in the right position when I import them? Let's say, for example, that bearing. That bearing goes right here in this hole that I made in this side piece. So I'm going to click insert, and I don't want to insert these parts because these bearings aren't grouped. I'm going to go to the assembly where I put them together and select the bearing. I'm going to click the green check mark. This bearing is now what's known as a sub-assembly. So it's an assembly within an assembly. These parts here, if I click this here, I can see all the parts, but they're already assembled to be a whole bearing. But I want this bearing to fit exactly in this hole. So I want to fasten it as if I took it and I stuck it in that hole. I'm going to grab this tool here called Fastened Mate. Now what I have to do here is I have to select 2 points that I want to connect. I want to imagine that I'm taking these 2 points and I'm gluing them together. So I'm going to find a point, find another point, and the assembly is going to lock them together. So you'll see that when you hover over things, different points will appear. These are called mate connectors. And so I want to find a mate connector that would match this outer hole here. And I can imagine this bearing going into that hole. It's actually going to be this surface here, that mate connector. And you can see it's highlighted the center of that circle as the point I'm going to use. So I'm going to click that, click, and you'll see it selected my first mate connector. And now I'm going to select my other mate connector, which is right out here. I'm going to click right there. All right. You can see it just popped it right in there so those 2 circles overlap. Now sometimes when you do this, it works out really nice. That one worked out nice. Sometimes it'll come in and it'll be backwards. So I'm going to click this flip primary axis button. You can see it's backwards. So it connected those 2 dots, but instead of putting them like this, it put them like that. So I might need to click this flip primary axis. Now this is something that's round, so if it turns in that space, it doesn't matter. But I also might click this reorient secondary axis, which will help rotate things into position. These are just ways to get it where you want. But once it looks really good and it's where I want to be, I'll click the green check mark. And you can see now I've got that bearing exactly in the hole I want it to be. And I can continue to bring more parts into the studio and fasten them where they go. So I can insert parts from my base. Let's say I need the other side. So I'm going to click this down arrow. I need the other part of this A-frame right here, and I need another support piece. So I might go ahead and grab my fastened mate. I'm going to select the bottom right here, I hover over this surface here and kind of, there we go, right there. And I want that to go right here. That looks good. I lucked out on the orientation there. Don't have to flip it at all. And let's do one more. Let's do a fasten mate. Let's do the bottom here, right there. And it needs to be in the center of this one. So let me zoom in. You can see right there. Just like that. Click the green check mark. Just like that. I'm going to need another bearing. So let's insert under assemblies my bearing. Set it down. And fasten that surface over here. And so this, it's like playing Legos at this point. You're essentially just fastening things to each other. You can see this is one that came in backwards. I need to click the flip. There we go. That flange. You can put the flange on the inside if you want. I'm putting it on the outside. Click that green check mark. There we go. So I'm starting to assemble it like this. I'm not going to assemble the whole thing. You might have wheels on the bottom. You've got your axle to insert. You've got sort of other parts. But I do want to show you the arm. Okay. Let's go ahead and insert the arm. The arm is different because I don't want to fasten it. I want it to be able to rotate freely. So instead of using this fasten mate here that sort of locks things in place, the one next to it's called Revolute. If I click Revolute, I can now select, I'm going to select this edge right here. And I want it to revolve around in this bearing. Let me go ahead and click here. You see it sort of snapped it to that bearing. And so that's going to be allowed to revolve. I'll show you it in a moment. But first, let's center it. So this doesn't look like it's kind of in the center. So I did that that mate. I revoluted it. You can do this with fasten as well. I can click offset, and I can say from those 2 points connecting, let's put an offset. So the offset it offers me is a Z offset. You can see the Z axis right here is blue. I want to send it to the left. The Z axis is pointing to the right. So this would be a negative offset. I might negatively offset it by, let's say, -1 inch. So that moved it back a little bit. All right, so maybe a little bit more. I'm trying to center it here. I can't remember exactly how wide this is. So -1.5. That looks like too far. -1.25. That looks, is that centered? Maybe about centered. -1.375. That's 1 3/8. That looks right. And I'll click the green check mark. Okay. So that should now be able to rotate around. If I click this, it should be allowed to rotate. Now, when I click it, it moves the whole thing. So I do need to maybe lock something in place. This whole thing's just floating. If I right click on the base, I can select fix for that base. Now the base is locked. When I try to grab the arm now, it'll pivot up and down because I told it that the mate that it uses is a Revolute. So that's kind of how you can do different things. There's Revolute, there's sliders, there's planar mates and cylindrical. There's all sorts of ways you can attach things in an assembly. But that sort of gives you an idea of how this is going to all go together. And ideally, you put the whole thing together in OnShape to make sure everything fits how you want it to before going to manufacture. One of the beauties of CAD is that you will be able to manufacture this digitally without wasting any resources. Maybe you're not sure if when this swings all the way down, if your basket is going to hit your base or not. So if I insert the basket, oops, I did not need that center part. Let's delete it there. Let's highlight them and group them. And let's throw a Revolute mate on here. Join a little quickly here so I can show you this. Not working. Let's try that again. Right here and right here. This probably needs to be offset by maybe 1 inch. A little bit less than that. Okay, there's my offset. So I've got this basket here. As I swing this down, I'll be able to see if the basket's going to hit the base. Let me go ahead and hide this part. If I right click on a part in a studio or an assembly, I can hide it. And now I can move it down. I can see, oh look, there's a lot of clearance there. There's no way my basket is going to hit. So that's pretty good. And the nice thing is your assembly will update even if you change the parts. So if I go back into my arm and I go back into the sketch where I made the hole, and let's say I move this hole to be 8 inches down the arm, click the green check mark, it moves that hole, and I go back to my assembly, you can see it's moved and it's now showing that. So now when it swings, bam, my basket is hitting the base. And CAD lets me know that before having to make this whole thing and realize that I made a huge mistake. So I go, oh shoot, it's gonna hit the base. Let's go back to my arm. Let's change this instead of 8 inches from the end. Let's make it 6. Whoops, I'm not sure I actually changed it. Yeah, I did, okay. And now I go back to my assembly and I swing it through here. Okay, good, I've got some clearance there. So let's bring back this other part 2, which is that side piece. This is starting to look pretty good and everything is coming together. So you might be adding your little hook there at the end of the arm. You might be adding wheels here. You should model your steel axle that goes through here to make sure that fits, and really just all the details you want in your trebuchet. All right. Have fun putting it all together. This is where it really kind of becomes real right before we start assembling on the laser cutter and using the saws and other parts. So have fun.